You're in the correct room, which is the Triangulum. But if you are in the wrong room, I'm going to say you probably want to stay here anyway because it's about to be awesome, as always. Thank you for joining us here. And if this is your first session that you're attending, welcome to the ACT Conference. Thank you for selecting this wonderful workshop. This workshop session is called the Triangulum, the intersection of cannabis, tobacco, and vaping. So we're going to cover it all, or Dr. Gardner is going to cover it all. We want to let you know that this workshop is being recorded, and I'm pleased to introduce the wonderful Dr. Philip Gardner. He will be your facilitator for this session. We will be dropping the workshop evaluation in the chat afterwards, but if you have questions along the way, please add them to the chat, and we will definitely get those answered for you. So if you're not speaking, of course, we're going to ask that you mute your microphones, and if you got your camera on, like I said, you are being recorded, so be mindful of making faces or what's happening in the background because it will be hilarious in playback. So I'm going to pass it off now to your wonderful presenter, Dr. Gardner.
Well, look, thank you, Derek, and thank all the people who've come to this. Fortunately, I think that people are aware of the Triangulum and that it isn't your regular tobacco use of the mid-20th century, whether it's the first, now it's the first 20 years of the 21st century. Having said that, just to restate it, I'm the one of the co-chairs of the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Council. And as many of you know, I'm recently retired from the University of California Office of the President Tobacco-Related Disease Research Program. I like to call this tobacco, marijuana, e-cigarettes, the future is now. And because the future is now, I would suggest that the 21st century presents us with a widely diverse array of new forms of smoking and smoking devices. The landscape has radically changed, especially for youth and young adults. This evolving landscape includes hookah pens that aerosolize flavored liquids with or without nicotine. We now have heat not burn products that produce an aerosol but no fire or smoke. Of course, we all know about colorfully packaged flavored little cigars and cigarillos, both regular and electronic. We have butane-derived marijuana that you can dab, and we have liquid THC, which you can aerosolize. Those are only a few of the things we're talking about. There's the co-mingling, the dual, and the poly use. Of course, we all know about blunts, hollowed out cigars filled with marijuana, but we know people are adding things to the blunt, sometimes called caviar, where they add crack cocaine or crystal meth. We know about rolling your own. I'll show you what a spliff is. And of course, mix your own. You can actually take different levels of nicotine, different flavors, and put it in your vaping device to vape your own way. Here's your basic blunt. This is a spliff. They call this a joint in the United Kingdom. Here we call them spliffs. It's a mixture of marijuana and tobacco. We have sticks, we have orbs, we have strips. I know initially 10 years ago when this first came out, everybody was going, oh, we're going to be doing this, we're going to be doing that. Those haven't gone so well, but we know what went well. Camel snus, actually we have spitless pouches, and we have juices that can be swallowed, which is very unappetizing, at least to me. We're nearing historic lows. The CDC projects, and by 2020, and here it is 2020, that smoking rates, of course, would be down somewhere in the neighborhood of 16%. We know that differs by race, ethnicity, and gender, to mention a few. But marijuana sales are, skyrocketing. Increased 30% in 2016. And it's projected that by 2026, marijuana industry could be a $50 billion industry. I'm going to talk a little bit about electronic cigarettes, the 21st century nicotine addiction. What's interesting about this slide, there's a lot of diverse e-cigarette products. This is from the Surgeon General's report in 2014. If you notice, there isn't a Juul or a Mod Pod on here. This is how radical and fast things are moving. These were the outstanding things of the e-cigarette 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Today, only a few of these products are being used more than the others. There's electronic cigars, Swisher Sweets International. We know that Swisher is one of the main flavored little cigars marketed in the Black community. They also have them in electronic form. First generation were your Cigalites. Your second generation of e-products were your tanks. And of course, your third generation, your Mod Pods, or in this case, have a picture of the jewel up there. This has all taken place in the last 10 years. Soren has become a big seller, and some of these other things have become big sellers. The Puff Bars has become a big seller. I know Addictor in chief is Juul. Juul has made a meteoric rise, and it's also had a meteoric fall because of all the deaths that were associated with it. Come to find out that it was not only just marijuana extracts and things like that, but actually some of the nicotine and some of the processes in here. Yeah, this is the new kid on the block, the Puff Bar. It's allowed, since it's disposable, you can buy these and you still have access to the 15,000 flavors that are out there on the market. E-cigarettes, the liquid, sometimes we call it the juice, and I think it's important to notice in this promotion from some company that I got it from, green apple, black cherry, caramel, tropical, menthol, etc., are all in the e-liquid. But the main ingredient is nicotine. Nicotine, of course, extracted from tobacco leaves. There's great variations in different brands. It's lethal if ingested. And frankly, it's detrimental to the fetus, whether you have a nicotine patch, whether you chew nicotine gum, whether you inhale it, whether you shoot it, whatever you do with it, it is detrimental to the fetus. Nicotine has tobacco-specific nitrosamines. Those are cancer-causing agents. Be aware that in 2009, when this was found out, actually, they stopped the importing of these products until it was agreed upon that they wouldn't be classified as medical devices, but rather as tobacco products. Be appraised that one of the Cigalites that we talk about is essentially equal to a pack of cigarettes. One Cigalite, one cigarette. Now, you know the tanks are much bigger and better, and some of the more recent things that we'll talk about have even more nicotine in them, but nicotine's the main thing. Now, nicotine in and of itself doesn't produce cancer or a lot of other things, but it's not benign. It's toxic, poisonous, and addictive. It raises blood pressure, builds up plaque in your veins, constricts blood vessels, increases the inflammatory response. We're going to talk about that later. Damages vascular tissues, elevate glucose levels, and exacerbates existing heart disease. So it's helpful in increasing the risk of cardiovascular disease. The other ingredient in it is propylene glycol. Propylene glycol, well, a lot of times you want to call the vapor or the fog. You know, imagine Dracula coming out on stage and is surrounded by all what looks like smoke. That's propylene glycol. It's, of course, FDA approved. It's used in cosmetics and medicine, and of course, short-term exposure to eyes, irritation to the throat, eyes, and airways. Long-term exposure can result in children developing asthma, and we'll talk about its cousin later when we heat it. Its chemical composition changes, and I'll talk about that when we talk about the vapor. The other ingredient is glycerin. It's another humectant. Again, it's FDA approved for ingestion. It can be hazardous to the skin, eyes, and exposure can damage organs. Be appraised that in the liquid, there are 10 particles that have been found in e-liquids, and this persists to this day. The last thing that we'll talk about in terms of what's in the e-cigarette are flavorants. And of course, one of the key ones is menthol. It has an anesthetic effect, promotes deeper inhalation. There's greater cell permeability. The punchline, it allows the poison to go down easier. the question of GROS is generally recognized as safe. No, it's not generally recognized as safe. And I'll go into this a little bit more detail, the difference between ingestion and inhalation. There are over 15,000 flavors evolved. And of course, many of these attract kids, but there's also exotics for adults, sex on the beach, aces and eights. Wonder what this would taste like. And as I mentioned earlier, the whole idea of mix your own, a la from the 60s and 70s of roll your own, you can have different concentrations of nicotine together with different flavors mixed and vaped. So what's in the aerosol? And no, it's not just water vapor. The aerosol contains all the things I just mentioned before, the propylene glycol, the glycerol, the flavorings, the nicotine, but also includes propylene oxide. Now, this can only occur if you raise the temperature a certain degree, but it breaks down the propylene glycol, and we know that propylene oxide is already a cancer-causing agent. There are volatile organic compounds in the aerosol, like benzene and toluene, and we've already mentioned that there's menthol in these products. It has also, the aerosol contains formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, acrolein. These are known cancer-causing agents. And again, in the aerosol, we see all these different metals that are there: tin, silver, iron, nickel, etc. And what's important, and I want to point this out for a second, these are nanoparticles. The particles range usually in size between fine, ultrafine, and nano. Cigarettes generally come in ultrafine particles. They penetrate deep into the lung, into the alveoli, and mess up your breathing, and that's what cigarettes do. Nanoparticles are even smaller. They can not only penetrate the cells in the alveoli, but they can also penetrate the actual mitochondria in the cell and the DNA there. We're just getting a handle on what's actually going on when you inhale the vapor from an electronic cigarette. And again, tobacco-specific nitrosamines, or the carcinogenic compounds found in tobacco and tobacco smoke, are also found in the aerosol of e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes emit metals used in their manufacturing. I guess the punchline, and there was a recent article on this, and it confirmed this article from a few years ago, that attention should be directed toward eliminating the use of these metals in cartridges during the manufacturing process. The little filament that runs through the liquid, that when you heat it, that's what gives off the aerosol, are made of metals, and they leach into the liquid, then goes into the aerosol, which you inhale if you're an e-cigarette user. Flavors are us. I mentioned this earlier, and if you take anything away from this presentation this morning, please take this away. Flavors generally recognized as safe? No, not for inhalation. Aldehydes toxicologically are primary irritants of the mucosa and the respiratory tract. The punchline is that the lungs have a different spectrum of toxicity than the intestinal tract. Substances known to be safe when swallowed can be dangerous when inhaled. But if you take anything away, take that away. Look at it this way: when you eat something, the saliva, your tube, your stomach, then it has to go through your intestines, and what happened, then on to the liver, or out the back door, as it were. With smoking, you inhale it, it goes to the bottom of your lungs, and within 5 to 7 seconds, it's in your head. There's different things going on. There's different organs that are affected, not for inhalation. Of course, we've talked about menthol a lot, why they put it in the product in the first place. It masks the harsh taste of smoking. It has cooling sensation. It has an anesthetic effect. It mimics bronchial dilation, easier to inhale. The deeper you inhale, the more nicotine you intake. The more nicotine you intake, the more addicted you become. The more addicted you become, the harder it is to quit. We also know that mentholated cigarette smoking inhibits nicotine metabolism in the In your liver, cigarettes are broken down into cotinine. Those that have menthol in it, it slows down the metabolism, means it stays in your body longer. We have data on that. Independent sensory activation of neurotransmitters. These are big words saying that menthol cigarettes attract more nicotine receptors in the brain than if it didn't have menthol in it. And lastly, and probably most important, there's greater cell permeability with menthol in the smoke, meaning that it will penetrate the cell membrane much more efficiently than if there's not menthol in the smoke. Flavors, aldehydes, causes respiratory inflammation, impairs immune cell function, deregulates antitoxic responses, increases susceptibility to infection, and frankly contributes to emphysema and COPD. That's what flavors do. Now that's fine, they taste good or they attract kids and stuff like that, but they're not trying to save lives, obviously. Cinnamonaldehyde in flavored cigarettes, we found that certain flavors are doing more damage than other flavors. We find that cinnamonaldehyde suppresses bronchial epithelial cell, cellular motility, meaning the cells don't move around that effectively, dysregulation of mitochondrial function, and essentially respiratory defenses are broken down. Inhalation of cinnamonaldehyde may increase the risk of respiratory infections in e-cigarette users. This was published just last year. Cariogenic potential of sweet flavors in electronic cigarettes. The punchline of all of this is that if you use e-cigarettes, it can lead to greater amounts of cavities in your mouth, straight up. We have data on this. This was produced just 2 years ago. Diacetyl, we're going to talk about here some. It's been approved for food use, but associated respiratory disease when inhaled. A study done found that, and what's important about this study, Ferris Salinas is an e-cigarette advocate. They looked at 159 different e-cigarettes and aerosols and liquids and found that nearly 75% of them had diacetyl in them. In English, 51 types of flavored e-cigarettes sold by leading e-cigarette brands of favor were deemed appealing to youth. Diacetyl was detected in the laboratory limit detection of 39 of the 51 flavors tested. So what's so important about diacetyl? What happened in I believe it was in Missouri 4 or 5 years ago. People working in packaging butter popcorn. They used diacetyl in butter popcorn, and some of it got loose. One person was seriously disabled. 4 others had to leave work and never were able to return. This is what diacetyl does. It attacks the tiny bronchial passages located near the alveoli, and this gradually becomes scarred and shut. One can become progressively shorter of breath due to poor oxygen absorption. Diacetyl has been found in many e-cigarette vapors, especially sweet flavors. This is something to be concerned about when you look at the packaging of these products. Trying to get a sense of what's in them is very important in terms of their content. When this was tested, aldehydes were tested in e-cigarette brands. Their thermal decomposition of flavoring compounds dominates the formation of aldehydes during vaping, producing levels that exceed occupational safety standards. This is a government study. We already know this. E-cigarettes, the second generation. The first generation, the cigalites, most toxins emitted in the aerosol were lower than in regular cigarettes. Aerosolized around 100 to 250 degrees centigrade. Celsius, centigrade, I like that. Second generation, the tank systems we're all familiar with, they're refillable. Some toxins emitted approaching found in regular cigarettes. Aerosolizing temperatures were greater than 250. And why I put an asterisk by that is you, do I have it on the next slide? Well, we'll get to it. Sometimes you can turn it up as high as you want, and we'll show you that as we move forward. Platelet activation, same as regular cigarettes. I know when I do this in class, so you ask the students, what happens when you cut yourself? And students would say, you would bleed. And of course, that's true. What the hemostatic system does, it then, a scar, a scab comes over the place where you're cut. And this is a protective matter. But when you do that inside of an artery or a vein inside your heart or inside your lungs, the hemostatic system is producing platelet matter, and that will actually lead to the blockage of that. The fine particulate matter found in electronic cigarette aerosol is the same range as mainstream and side stream tobacco smoke. Let's be clear on that. This is what the picture I was looking for. I may move this around when I do the presentation again. What's important about this tank system is if you look at the little, this thing, this is a dial. This allows you to turn up the amount of power, the amount of the temperature and the amount of voltage in it. And it allows for the propylene oxide that we talked about earlier to be emitted. This is a great slide. The first part of the sentence, on average, toxins were 13 to 807-fold lower than in tobacco cigarettes. That's amazing. That's why they're said to be more safe. However, when the voltage was increased from 3.2 to 4.8, the levels of formaldehyde were in the range of the levels reported in tobacco smoke. If you turn up the heat, it gets more dangerous. The battery voltage increases, toxins increase. That's just basic chemistry. Here's the iPhone of e-cigarettes, or at least it used to be. The Juul. The Juul uses nicotine salts. What's important about nicotine salts and the benzoic acid is that they don't have the same harshness that free-base nicotine has. And essentially, it allows the poison to go down easier too. You add to that flavors, and this is what makes e-cigarettes so addicting with the nicotine and the type of nicotine they're using. E-cigarettes, again, as we mentioned, contain glycerol and propylene glycol, and the benzoic acid and flavorings. Virginia tobacco, cool mint, fruit medley, creme brulee, mango, et cetera, et cetera. Juul uses a lithium-ion polymer battery, and generally, and this was done, I put this together a couple of years ago, Juul costs usually between $35 and $50 for a pack of 4 pods and the device. But usually you get, when you go to the site, you can then get a coupon to bring it down to about $35 or $40. And pods, 4 pods usually cost $16 on the market. We've got a new phenomena going on. Remember, this is 21st century, guys, of dripping. Dripping is when you take the actual content, the aerosol, the liquid, and drip it directly on the coil, on the power source. It kind of looks like that. Dripping directly onto the heated atomizers. One study found that 25% of students reported ever using e-cigarettes were using it for dripping. There are thicker clouds, tasted better, stronger throat hit. But here's the punchline with dripping. Volatile aldehyde emissions, including formaldehyde, greatly exceed values previously reported for conventional e-cigarettes and combustible cigarettes. It's even more than combustible cigarettes when you drip. Increasing the inner drip interval results in greater VA emissions. Instead of drop, 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 if you went drop, 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 then you'll get greater volatile aldehyde emissions. The higher temperatures attained while dripping are inherently likely to produce higher toxic emissions. Here's a study. I'm going to try to change, or at least I'm going to bring another aspect into it. Great study done by colleague Kelvin Choi. They looked at 5 different groups: cigarette-only users, non-cigarette combustibles, essentially your cigars and hookahs and etc. Non-combustibles, essentially your e-cigarettes, people who use dual use, and then people who use poly-use. What they found is that 30% of the people using these products were dual users. And there's a lot of other data to support that. I don't have it in this presentation, but most people that are using these devices are dual users. Non-combustible only were people who only used e-cigarettes. Cigarettes were 15%, poly tobacco use was 17%, and non-cigarette combustibles, your little cigars and cigarillos, were running a close second to dual use. What's important about all of that is that we have to look at things through the racial and ethnic lens. If we don't, then we're not going to do great tobacco control work. I'm gonna direct your attention to the middle of this chart to non-Hispanic Blacks and go over to combustible only other than cigarettes. And that's generally little cigars. 50% of non-Hispanic Blacks reporting using combustibles other than cigarettes. They're smoking little cigars. A number of us have known this for some time in the Black community. Let me do one with you, and this is American Natives, Indian population. You look all the way over to poly tobacco use, a quarter of all people that responded were using multiple different forms of tobacco. They're chewing, using e-cigarettes. We know e-cigarettes are big user in California's American Indian population, and cigarettes and cigars. So you got to look at each group separately, or else we won't be doing very good tobacco control work. Moving on. Marijuana. This is great. Widely used, recreation illegal in 8 states, medically adopted in 18 others. I guess the election last night, 4 other states, and I would be guessing at them right now. I believe it was Arizona and South Dakota. Those 2 I remember, and there are 2 others that made it recreationally legal. So this is on the way up. I show you this, look at the bottom of this chart. Marijuana use surpassed cigarette use by 2000, essentially by 2011. That was 9 years ago. So kids, when I do this and we talk about mentally, think about what young Black kids are using. Young Black kids are smoking blunts, they're smoking little cigars, they're smoking marijuana, and if they smoke cigarettes, they're using a Newport, okay? So, and this is gonna be different from Asian and Pacific Islanders, and that's a great category in itself. You gotta break that down and look at and compare what Native Hawaiians are doing and what folks from Vietnam are doing. You cannot clump people into these massive categories. It will not lead to good tobacco control work. Here's the punchline. 27% who have used both marijuana and e-cigarettes reported using e-cigarette aerosolizers to vaporize cannabis, including hash oil and wax THC. This is the definition of the triangulum. This is what's going on. This was done in 2015. This has only increased. And particularly during the pandemic, there has been greater marijuana and tobacco use for that matter. So I think what got my attention early on in my work around tobacco is that marijuana contains a lot of the same, and what I've become to find out is that that plants, when burned, produce the same chemicals, whether it's a forest fire, whether it's burning the leaves in the garage, whether it's smoking a joint or smoking a cigarette. They're all going to produce these things. So if we look at some of these things, benzene, which we know is bad for your health, is greater in marijuana than in cigarettes. Toluene is greater in marijuana than in cigarettes. Styrene is greater in marijuana than in cigarettes. Um, of course, formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, and acrolein are higher in cigarettes, but still present in marijuana. But get this, benzopyrene, probably one of the most deadly things around, are almost equal between tobacco and marijuana. And then pyrene itself is greater in marijuana. So I think it's important that we keep in mind that marijuana isn't harmless. It can be just as detrimental to yourself. And as we know, a number of people will be smoking a cigarette and then take a hit off a joint. So they're compounding the issue. Or as the great slide that was shared with me, it's like inhaling a whole chemistry lab. We have a study that shows that marijuana secondhand smoke for 1 minute substantially impairs blood vessel function in rats. Neither the THC nor the paper smoke are required for marijuana secondhand smoke to impair the blood vessel function. Nicotine is not required for impairment of blood vessel function by smoke. Punchline, 1 minute of marijuana secondhand smoke exposure impairs blood vessel functions for at least 90 minutes. That's greater than what goes on with a cigarette. So that, yeah, marijuana is not benign, and I can't point this out more. Comparing marijuana users and non-marijuana users and alcohol and other drug use. I just want to check and see how I'm doing in terms of time. Compared to those who only smoke cigarettes, those who also use marijuana were more likely in the past month to use alcohol and to use other drugs. And among those who drank, marijuana users had more total drinks per day, per month, per day, and heavier drinking days. Dabbing. Until a few years ago, I didn't even know what this is. There's a lady dabbing. Dabbing is inhaling the vapors from a concentrated form of marijuana made by extracting THC using butane gas. Dab's also known as a butane hash oil or BHO, bladder, honeycomb, earwax. Imagine you put a little funnel together and you pour and put the marijuana at the base of it, and you pour butane gas over it. When it comes out, it lands like that and looks like the concentrate. Do not light a match around it, obviously, and have to let it cool since you're using butane gas. But the THC is captured in that. The rest of the plant itself is then discarded. This is what's become known as dabbing. Then you have profit. I Googled this. You have some devices that would allow you to smoke herb in it, to vape liquid in it, or to dab wax, as we saw there. You can buy these and use these, and kids are doing that. Now, I was told what to do here, and I'm going to do it.
I think if you just, there you go.
Let me suggest, if you're doing this at home, that you wear gloves. that pod switching is pretty normal. And that could have been, you could have been liquid meth, it could have been liquid cocaine, it could have been, in this case, tobacco, liquid nicotine, marijuana. Um, this is the definition of the triangulum. You just saw it there. And if you are going to do this at home, you have to wear gloves. One of the main things that I've talked to security officers and health officers at schools is one of the things they run into are the nicotine poisoning for handling all these different products. So let's just be careful with that. Smokeless tobacco use, not as high here in California, but higher in other states. This is nationwide. Of course, males are leading that, females are way down, and whites seem to be the ones majority doing smokeless tobacco. What do we have next? Hookah. It's more than flavored tobacco and water. Even though this picture is from 2010, 2014, hookah use is still on the rise, and the political power of the hookah lobby is becoming such that even in the new bill passed this year in California, Senate Bill 793, hookahs were made exempt. And this is a real problem, given their use, particularly by youth. 2 out of every middle school student and nearly 5 out of every 100 high school student reported this, but this is 2017. That now with the pandemic, I don't know what has changed in terms of this, but hookah still remains popular throughout the United States, particularly among young adults. Remember I talked earlier about the e-pens or the e-hookah pens. You can have this sitting on your desk at school, and sometimes teachers will not know the difference between that and a coloring pen. And while they have all these various flavors in them, even if they don't have nicotine in them, which most of them do, but if some of them don't, I told you all that stuff about aldehydes and flavors, they're still not that good for you. This is your basic schematic of a hookah. Tobacco at the bottom, the foil between the charcoal and tobacco, you inhale it, it goes through the water, and then it's supposed to be cleaner. A single hookah tobacco smoking session exposes users to 25 times the tar, 125 times the smoke, 2.5 times the nicotine, and 10 times the carbon monoxide compared to a single cigarette. So this is a public health menace that we're going to have to tackle here in the 21st century. It's there to be tackled, and it needs to be done sooner than later. Lastly, let me talk a little about heat not burn. E-cigarettes are so last year. The tobacco industry, we're coming to find out that e-cigarettes are a niche project, and that all the products I've kind of gone over is, we've gone from cigarettes, we've gone from one cigarette, and then we've gone completely sideways. They want a product that tastes like tobacco, smokes like tobacco, and has the throat rub or feels like tobacco. But it has to be safer than conventional cigarettes. But is it? Reduced risk products are a fundamental component of regulatory efforts to reduce smoking prevalence. This is from Philip Morris. Quote, our ambition is to convince all adult smokers that intend to continue smoking to switch to reduced risk products as soon as possible. This is why this got, imagine that Heat Not Burn got its regulatory clearance this year from the FDA. And we already know that it's bad for you. I'm going to go into that here in a second. This is what we're talking about, the IQOS heating system, or I Quit Original Smoking. Marlboro heat sticks, the Heat Not Burn. You keep the brand Marlboro, now it's heat sticks. This is kind of what it looks like. And this is kind of how it works. It's half the size. of a regular cigarette. I think this one will work by itself, even though we didn't try it, Derek. I had tried it earlier. Let's get this lie straight. This will give you a sense of what's going on.
And if it doesn't play, I can try and pull it up separately.
No, can you see it?
I can't. Yeah, we can't, or at least I can't. I don't know if anybody else or the only person I see right now is Stephanie. Stephanie, can you see it?
I see a dark, like square.
Okay.
Okay, so no, it's not showing then. Never mind.
I'll try and pull it while you can keep going. I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah, let me get away from this. We'll move on. And what the diagram that you'd have seen, and I apologize for that. Again, has a lithium ion battery. It has reconstituted tobacco sheets, which they call cast leaf. I did a study, I did some research and found there's 156 distinct flavors added to the tobacco cast leaf. And these are just some of them that I found. They're again propylene glycol and glycerin, the same humectants that are in e-cigarettes. And then the blade, that little short cigarette, actually then when you push it in, hits a blade. And that blade is heated to 300 to 350 degrees Celsius by gold, platinum, or ceramic blade. Here we again, what is in the coils in these cigarettes, or the blade in the IQOS, we're only beginning to understand what's the impact of that. These are some of the list of ingredients. This is from the United Kingdom. I mean, since it was just done here in the United States, we don't have this directly there. But what I wanted to point out to people is, if you notice that 44% of the ingredients in the IQOS are filtration materials. And if you add to that the heat stick, paper, and wrapper, over 50% of this is packaging that you're smoking. And it's very interesting. And what will that do in terms of your health? We're just finding out. IQOS exposure is detrimental to cigarette smoking and vaping to human lung cell. Persistent allergic smoke or environmental trigger inflammation leads to airway remodeling and scarring. Disturbs the way the cells convert oxygen into energy for the cells to use. Myocardial dysfunction is the primary cause of airflow limitation in people with asthma and COPD. There are a number of studies like this pointing out what's wrong with IQOS. And what the FDA used as their benchmark. Well, are they worse than cigarettes? Well, cigarettes are the #1 killer in the world. I mean, it's outrageous. They needed to do something about it. They have IQOS lounges in Japan. They have IQOS lounges in Switzerland. When they launched their program in Atlanta earlier this year, they opened up an IQOS lounge there that is still open and selling IQOS. I suppose other cities have these. In any event, the punchline here is that the Triangulum, tobacco, marijuana, and e-cigarettes, the future is now. This is no longer my father who smoked Chesterfields and Lucky Strikes. No, people are smoking all sorts of things. The 21st century smoking landscape, we're talking about combustible tobacco products, aerosolized nicotine with e-cigarettes, heat not burned with IQOS. There's dabbing, dripping, blunts, hookahs, gums, chews, orbs, patches. Did I mention marijuana? In any event, we're only 20 years into the century. And with that, I'll stop there. and take any questions that people have, or I haven't looked at the box.
Well, looking at the comments or chat, it doesn't look like there's very few questions. I didn't see any. Looks like you're pretty thorough with what you're saying. But if anybody did want to drop any questions, now would be a wonderful time. I did have one myself, Dr. Gardner. You said that was there any question or any data along the lines for looking at use during pandemic? Is there anybody who has information that they did statistically or survey wise about usage during the pandemic?
I haven't been able to find any, but I'm unfortunately, a lot of this is word of mouth. I know a number of people whose sons and daughters go to historically Black colleges, many in and around Atlanta, and I know it's a big thing there, but that's just anecdotal.
I have a question. Hi. I was in the previous workshop, I was in the Cannabis Stanford Toolkit workshop, and I asked the same question, and I want to know your opinion. So there's a lot of, recently in Netflix, they just put up 2 documentaries. I think one is called Weed the Nation, and then something else with cannabis, The Grass is Greener, something like that. What is your opinion in terms of how to address the students that look at products like cannabis in the way that the media is portraying them? You know, like in these documentaries, they talk about cannabis as an alternative medicine for cancer. And in, you know, and right, and in the other documentary, they talk about cannabis and in like the music industry, starting as early as the jazz and the jazz musicians, and the criminalization of marijuana use by people of color, particularly our Black men. And so like, how do you address young people's understanding of cannabis with that? And also, you know, if the adults around them, like whether it's their parents, their uncles, their like those role models that are around them that are using those products as well. So how do you address their understanding that they have and that experience that they have, and help
Well,
them?
actually, I think that's a good point. Your first point around it might be yes, there can be medicinal uses to marijuana. But I think I'm going to just say this directly. We have data that shows that some of the lung cancer rates, COPD rates, emphysema rates, we would have to disaggregate marijuana users out of just sold tobacco users, marijuana and tobacco user or marijuana users. We would need to do that type of study to see what the contribution of smoking a joint is on all those illnesses. And it would be very important to do. I want to encourage you were probably talking to Bonnie. I've had this discussion with her many times before. I think that's important to actually do. Some of the, not a lot, but a portion of the lung cancer cases, a portion of the COPD cases, et cetera, are because of smoking marijuana. That's why it was criminalized in the first place in the 1930s, is because jazz musicians were using marijuana, and the jazz musicians were Black folks. And that just got exacerbated in 1970 with Richard Nixon and the war on drugs, and further exacerbated with this mass incarceration movement launched by Ronald Reagan and supported by all the presidents since then. So that makes sense. I think in terms of role models, it points out the importance of education to both students and parents. And this can't be just let's talk to the students about this. We've got to talk to the parents about this too. I know my colleagues in PAVE, Parents Against Vaping, e-cigarettes, are trying to do that. So actually, it's an excellent question that you've posed.
Thank you.
Yes. We did have another one in chat. It says, when teaching students about these products, is there a danger of introducing them to new stuff they never heard of?
This is an excellent point. As a an old researcher, as a retired researcher, it's a human subjects question. Imagine you want to find out what kids know about, let's say, dabbing, like I showed in the thing. What if kids haven't heard about dabbing? Then you're introducing it to them. That might influence then what the actual study does, not only in terms of their use, but in terms of their responses. You have to be very careful when we do these type of introductions. Um, I'm assuming that many of the people here on the call work in terms of the school districts around California and may not be aware exactly of this product or that product. But think of your colleagues that don't, your friends that don't. Um, when you introduce these new products, just make sure that you are, what do I want to say, that you inform them as much as you can about this in the best way that you can about it. So good point. That's another excellent point.
And I just realized I shared it privately. I'll repost. Somebody asked for the information from the last slide, which was your contact info and the saving saving Black Lives link. I'll repost that in the chat. And another question was, or somebody spoke outside a grocery store recently. Someone was trying to gather signatures in response to tobacco stores and was unhappy about potential legislation. Are you aware, or can you explain that?
So what's going on? Let me do it this way. On August 28th, Governor Newsom signed into law Senate Bill 793 that would prohibit the sale of all flavored tobacco products in California, including menthol cigarettes. It exempted premium cigars, it exempted hookah, and it exempted roll your own. On August 31st, that was on a Friday, on a Monday, August 31st, the tobacco industry filed suit um, to take out a referendum that would, if they could collect 635,000 or 632,000 signatures by November 26th, then they could then block the implementation of SB 793. Subsequently, what has been going on and what the question I believe that people are talking about is they've had signature collectors going, the tobacco industry has had signature collectors going around falsely stating what they're collecting the signatures for. We've actually got, and I'll come to that in a moment, we've actually know that there's actually saying to people, if you sign this, we'll be able to get rid of menthol in our community. No, it's exactly the opposite. If you sign it, you're gonna continue to get menthol in your community. If the bill that the governor passed that would have prevented that. So there's a lot of that going on. Be aware if you're approached, ask the right question. Their signature is trying to prevent the Tobacco Control Act from going forward. In fact, a number of groups have filed suit with the state attorney general about this practice that is going on where they're falsely advertising or falsely portraying what the initiative is about.
Yes, thank you. Wonderful answer. I went ahead and I dropped the workshop evaluation into the chat. So we'll still continue to answer any questions that come across if you want to add them into the chat box. But take the next couple of minutes, please click on the link and give your evaluation for this wonderful workshop. I'm seeing 5 stars across the board because it's been informative. Sure.
Less is more, less is more.
Click on the workshop evaluation and go ahead and fill that out for us. And please, if you have any additional questions, we're here for the next couple of minutes.
Let me just say something in closing. let me thank Derek for hosting this. I've actually seen you at a number of events and a number of times. Actually, let me shout out to Scott Gerbert and the rest of the team. Actually, it made it seamless. I'm not able to participate in the other events in the conference, given I'm doing a few too many things in my life. But I just wanted to thank people for doing that. And if you have questions, I thought the questions that were asked are excellent questions. I've been a researcher most of my adult life. When you don't know something, dig for it, look for it, call somebody up, go to the library, Google it, go for it. With that, I'll shut up.
Well, there is another question that came in while you're talking in detail about your, and all being recorded. So Scott and them hear this. Somebody did say, I work for a school district located in a low socioeconomic area. And while we are able to successfully capture the attention and participation of the Hispanic Latino population, the parents, we're finding it difficult to capture the attention and participation of our African-American population. Any strategies or advice?
Great question. I would like to say there is an easy answer. I mean, clearly it would be important for African American people at your school to reach out to the African American parents to make that. And if you're from a low socioeconomic area, then I think it's clear that disproportionate number of parents are children are living in one parent household, mothers and or fathers are in jail, and many of the lower income may smoke or use other substances. And I think the task is cut out. If you can reach out to whether it's I know the NAACP is supporting the work that we're doing around menthol, at least the African American Tobacco Control Leadership Councils. You can reach out to us, you can reach out to me. We can see us. I don't know what area you're specifically in, but we have people in San Diego, in Orange County, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in Oakland, in Sacramento, and Never Everland. I believe they said, this Elizabeth, you're in Kern County. I know we have some people that we work with in Kern County. I will see what we can do. You have my information. Send me an email on it. I'll get some of our folks who actually have some contacts there, and we can talk about it. Great question. Great question. It must be showtime.
I think that is pretty much it, other than people giving you shots out for doing awesome work and making the science easy to receive and being able to deliver it. It's very potent. And as always, I learned something new. Well, I'm going to thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you at the workshop. Pleasure hearing Dr. Gardner. Thank you for your information. And if you get a chance, go back into the app and see what other things you can kind of play around with, get them points up, because I know some people are competitive out there. Go to see if you can win on the leaderboard by doing quite a few things. So enjoy the workshop, the components of it. And if you are coming back tomorrow, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day. So we thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you all.
Oh, let me stop the recording.
Write me, Elizabeth.